um, like half a dozen or so.
Yeah.
Um, so the this comes on that if to turn down. The big idea is that is to spend some time one uh, studying for those who want to use this as a prelude to mastering synagogue skills, the which is how I conceive of what people call adult bar and bat mitzvah. We can use it as that as well. But the idea is to take the way like B'nai Mitzvah students would like learn through to take a survey of what Jewish life is. I thought we'd do that as well. And my idea was to do it with this book, about books, partly because Jews are known as the people of the book, which, if you got as far as the introduction, he notes is not a term that Jews came up with, it's a term that Muslims came up with um, to describe Jews and Christians, um, people who were outside of the fold, but at least had a literary tradition that connected them to God, as opposed to um, lower level infidels. But Jews sort of like latched onto this. Jews liked being called the people of the book as if it's a term of honor, even though it was a way to like classify Jews as second class citizens in Muslim societies. The but it's a term that sort of has stuck. So I did this. I had an like readers like a reviewer copy for many years since this came out in like 2016. I had to order the proper one because the text in this was just too hard to read for me. But if you want a free copy, you can take that one. I don't know if the pages are the same. The But Adam Kirsch is a literary critic. He writes on general subjects and on Jewish subjects, and I thought this was a nice journey through Jewish life. Jewish life, if you come to synagogue often, seems like it existed in ancient times, like in the time of the Bible, and maybe goes up through the time of the Second Temple to maybe the year 70 until you get to Tisha B'Av, and then it stops and picks up again in like 1939. Right? Like, so the goal is to fill in all those 2000 years in part that Jews often like skip over, like the where you go from like biblical times or the Maccabees, and then you start again with like Ben Gurion. So that's sort of like that. It's not a great way of approaching it. So the idea is to fill in all of those blanks in between and not to dwell on Torah, because that we get to do all the time, but to like move through the different places where Jews have lived and the different sort of social pressures that Jews have gone through and the different influences on Judaism so that you can understand where we are and how we got here. Does this make sense? Yeah, and the idea is to like go through this and do like a chapter a week, and then we can come in and we'll talk about it, and like we'll study like what's in it, and I like how and look at like one or two ideas in depth, or if you have something else on your mind, we can talk about that. The idea is that you should feel free to interrupt me because it's better when I get interrupted. Um, the so all of that. My assumption is that not everybody will have read for the first week of class. So today we'll do something else, but the next time, like the introduction and chapter one on Sefer Devarim. So the not in line with Nancy's alleged method to my madness. Um, Next time. The This makes sense? Huh. All right. Um, so that my goal then is that we also know each other. So it's the first day of class. We have to quick go around, and because sometimes people like see each other and seen each other for like 10 years, but like don't know their names, the and are embarrassed to ask at this point. So say your name, and say if you could add or subtract one mitzvah to the 613 mitzvot that are out there, which one would you add or subtract? And don't say adultery. Don't say that you would add it as if you know that it's not there, and don't say you'd subtract it if you know that it's in fact there. So I'm putting you on the spot.
You think I'm gonna pay attention to what you just said?
Your name, and if you could add or subtract one mitzvah to the 613 mitzvot, what mitzvah would you
I'm
add?
still working on, does that make sense?
Right, yeah.
Al Halpern, I've been here for a while. What would I add?
Yeah, or subtract.
No, I don't wanna subtract anything. I'm still working on the 613. I need to do the next one. I would like to do the mitzvah where my wife takes care of me.
Oh, all right. Good, good. All right. And the people said amen. Next. Right, yeah. Right. Not in a Jersey sort of Sopranos way, but all right. I mean, take care of. Next.
It's interesting because the only one that I think makes no sense, and my grandfather thought it made no sense too, is shatnez.
Shatnez, mixing wool and linen in the same garment. Forbidden. Barney's would check for yes.
Rabbi Ross lived with in Patterson when he was in school. So, and Rabbi Wasserman was my mother's Hebrew school teacher.
Nice.
So my grandfather, who
was
a learned person, that was one that he really
didn't like shatnez.
It didn't made any sense to him. So I would say it really doesn't make any sense to me either. What's the problem with mixing linen and wool? Why did they do that?
But in Deuteronomy, it's forbidden. So we can get there. It's I would say the short answer is it doesn't say. It says thou shalt not.
Yeah,
Just
that's
because.
yeah, just because.
Most mitzvot in the Torah are didactic. Is that the word? It just a reason isn't given. It just says do this. Right. So you right. The next.
Steve Alford. I am having trouble. I guess I would be breaking this photo if I said I had the exact same one Linda just did.
All right.
But I would be breaking it if I said that, so I won't say that, but
It's fine with that. That's all.
I'm having trouble. The only thing that comes to mind is, but I'm sure there's something I don't know offhand, a kindness toward animals.
So, all right. So I've been asked to repeat things so that people online can hear. Alan said that he would add a commandment where Linda has to take care of him. Linda said that she would get rid of, or the shatnez, the prohibition on mixing wool and linen in the same garment. And Steve said kindness to animals is debatable whether or not it's there. It likely is. It just isn't worded that way. Wendy's going to pass because she loves the tradition so much. There's nothing she can. It's perfect as is. Adding or subtracting would be like adding a brushstroke to the Mona Lisa. It's right. Right. Yeah. Okay, so.
Bill Weinstein, I had a corollary. Honor thy mother and father. I'm going to add, since I forgot an apple today, honor thy teacher. Is that was that covered anywhere?
The rabbis say that it is a corollary to honor your parents. That they bring you in. If I may quote it, your parents bring you into the world, and and your rabbi brings you into the world to come.
Whoa.
Yeah. So no pressure.
Dave Bernstein. And I think I would, out of curiosity, more than anything else, maybe tweak or massage the rules around kashrut.
Kashrut. So David, change the rules. Anyone in particular you're looking to No, not gonna name, we're not gonna name delicious. Right.
Like seafood. I think that's what you've heard.
Right.
100%.
Right, right. So we're not gonna name any delicious foods, but right. Right. Yeah. For all this time. Like a show. I'm going to pass. Perfect as is. Right, that's, yeah, no, the command, there's an obligation to help the poor. Yes, yes. So in fact, in Deuteronomy, it says there shall be no poor in your midst, meaning that not only are you obligated to help them, but you're supposed to. This is the whole idea of New Jersey. You move to the next suburb. That's why Linda's family is no longer in Patterson. Yeah, that's right. True.
And, I will happily admit that I am not learned enough to be able to recount the 13 to know the difference. But I will add something, I would, give grace to, Jet fans.
Give Grace.
Playing tonight.
Oh, okay. So yeah, forget, right. So some level of Rahmanis for fans of the New York Jets. Right. Let's try.
I'm Christine, and I'm gonna jump on David's bandwagon because it serves my own interests as well.
Right. So simpler kitchen.
Kitchen,
So, right. Right. All right. Kashrut.
Alan Ridley and some of them, but I would make a sophistic change. I would trade locust for shrimp.
Oh, wait, but you can't eat, oh, meaning that the kosher locust that you can eat, that you're willing to give that up in order to have shrimp, right? Yeah. Right. It's fun. There's Sephardim that know the proper insects that you can have. Right. Most insects not. There's some hopping insects that Sephardim hold by. So yeah.
Don't they have the same 613 we do?
It's a yes. Just a little variation when it comes to some grasshoppers. Yeah. Al.
Hi, everybody, I'm Alan Francis, who I that who changed the kidney yolk for Ashkenazi and Thomas.
That's not halakha. Yeah, so that's merely custom.
No,
Yeah.
locust.
Well, moving on. Let's keep going.
and loosen it up a little bit, like the non-driving and the not using electricity and things like that.
So I have a question, but is that the actual mitzvah? Or that's the added to by the rabbi?
We can talk about that. Well, let's hold that thought on Shabbat and driving and see if we get there even tonight, possibly even tonight. We'll see how fast we're driving.
Peggy's husband, I remember my one name.
See.
Steve Ginsburg, bacon.
Bacon. One word, bacon. Right. Right. It's not we're not going to change any long-standing customs here tonight. Just so I'm not going to, at least. Right. Yeah, right. Enough to change the bylaws on the Jewish people. Keep going. We'll catch them at the end. Right. Oh, sorry.
do all of them. I know there are some that don't use it all, they're not relevant. I would like to know how we accept the fact that they're not relevant.
Put me down to that, though. It's me.
So ones that, so Elena, don't mess up the temple kitchen. Linda has review the ones that deal with the ones that aren't relevant. Nancy,
Yeah.
yes.
I don't know if they're mixed up, no, but a lot of the caution rules just make no sense to me. For example, I understand separating like day and week and that kind of thing, but what I don't understand is the intensity of the separation that you have to clean and oven and caution and barbecue and all of that kind of stuff. You know, it just doesn't make sense. Except they have to start doing that.
Yeah.
Some of it does not make sense to me. It's too stressful for the modern woman.
So the intensity of kashrut. Right, okay.
Having based in real bodily intention.
Got it. Yeah.
One green bird. Is there a mitzvah associated with listening?
Shema.
Okay, I reinforce that one.
Yeah. Reinforce and listen. All right, yeah.
Phyllis Cass. I don't know all of the 613 mitzvot, but the one that makes absolutely positively no sense to me is shatnez.
Shatnez and kashrut are really coming in for a beating. Your name, and if you could add one mitzvah or subtract one mitzvah, and don't say adultery, what would it be? Huh? Shatnez. Yeah. Does this really burden people? Like, has it really stopped you from doing anything?
Christianity story.
Yes, this question that they sat around in robes, like, right. Guys, as long as we're at it, let's just throw them all out. He said, "This is how Christianity started." That just US, right? Yeah, right.
You should get the rabbi to answer the question.
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't think that far ahead. Yeah.
Skip that part. You can go, yeah.
Oh, yeah, which one to get rid of?
Or add.
You think we'll have a one God thing?
Yeah. Stupid monotheism. I'll go with Nancy and Kashrut.
Kashrut, true intents on kashrut. What would I do? I think I would. I'm Dan. I may get the 8 days of Pesach. I would shave back down to 7. It's a modest change. And the worst one is 2 days of Shavuot, because if the idea behind the second day of a holiday is that in the diaspora is that it took them a long time to get word out from Jerusalem when the new moon was sighted, you didn't know by mid-month when the holiday occurred whether it was. The Shavuot is based on the new moon of Nisan, meaning that the point of Shavuot is that it takes place 50 days after Passover, which means that the new moon and Passover is on the 14th of Nisan, meaning that you're 65 days out. Like, sort of word has gotten there by then. So I would just shave back down the 2 days of Yontif.
So if it's 7 days in Israel.
Yeah.
So are we counting from the 7th day or from our 8th?
You start counting from the second day of Passover.
Oh, okay, that
Yeah,
part.
yeah.
What about the second day of Rosh Hashanah?
Second day of Rosh Hashanah is even done in Israel, so like that's a harder one to like sort of shave off of. But like, you know, that one I'm sort of okay with. Passover and obviously like Shmini Atzeret, like sort of like feels like it's a little much. There are shuls, who do drop the second day, but like, I have to say, like, I'm sort of like, like, most people who don't want to celebrate, yeah. Reform, there are conservative shuls who do it, but like, my logic is, people who don't want to show up on the 8th day of Passover, you know what they do? They don't show up on the 8th day of Passover. Like, sort of like thing.
You're not taking the second.
But so,
The brisket.
right, what do you do with the leftovers? Let me ask this of people online. I want to hit Sherry. We're gonna go in order that I see people. If
Hi.
you're with Sherry Lerner.
Yeah, Sherry Lerner, hi. So I would add, respect your children, or honor your children. We have honor your mother and father, but honoring your children is important too.
Right, yeah, so that one's like right to the point. There is an honor your mother and father commandment, but there is no honor your children commandment or anything vaguely in the neighborhood. Good one. Right, you could, right, next. Thank you. Lawrence, you look like you're next in my screen.
Big, Lawrence Cass. To me, it's easy. Shellfish.
Shellfish, simple. It's her son. Do you see good one. Phil, you're next in my screen.
Should be a great mitzvah for your kids to move out of the house already.
Right there. Phil Lewis, get your kids to move out of the house already. Good. Paula, are you?
It's Beth.
Beth.
Yeah. It's kind of like the kosher, but it's when a child is born from a Christian person to have to go through the mitzvah because they're uncleansed.
Mikvah, yeah.
That I just found that very insulting.
Right. And then right. So all right. So changing mikvah rules, not uncleansed. It's not about clean or unclean. It's a ritual of conversion. Yeah. There's nothing to do with like sort of
That's why I heard it, that they were not clean.
yeah. So no, they could have just walked out of the shower. It's like not yeah. So different sort of idea, but got it. Okay, so mikvah for conversion. Gail, you're next on my list.
I'm Gail Skolke, and it's okay with me not to eat things from a pig. I'm not used to sausage and bacon, but and I'm not much of a fish eater, but I will eat shrimp and lobster. So I would put those back.
Shrimp and lobster are coming in. All right, this is good. And Agrins. Pass. Perfect as is. Mona Lisa. I got an extra Sherry here.
That's not me. That's someone else.
Spare Sherry. All right. Good enough. All right then. I want to dive in. Now I know that I have to get to Shatnez. I wasn't going to do Shatnez, but apparently I might have to. All right. So because on my assumption that people hadn't read at the beginning, I figured we had to start somewhere else. So I decided to start with like sort of an overview of the sort of like push and pull with Jewish society and books and words, and sort of like how this ball got rolling on Jews and books and words, because it's not like a given. It may not be apparent to everyone. Not every culture is based on books. Not every people like sort of develops this way. So I want to look a bit at how this works. If you're online, I just put the link to what I'm looking at in the chat there. The bracha for Torah study is Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kshanou mitzvot tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah It says, blessed are you, Adonai, our God, whose mitzvot add holiness to our lives and commands us to busy ourselves with the Torah. So even that, by the way, note that we say that God commands us to study Torah. You can read the Torah and it doesn't say thou shalt study Torah, right? So already notice that there's some sort of like leaping off point that's different from what's in there. I want to start out with a great line from Kohelet from the book from Ecclesiastes, where he says, "Hizaher asot sefarim arbe ein kates." Of the making of books, there is no end. And much study is wearying of the flesh. Lahagarbe aigot basar. Kohelet tends to be cynical, and he says, books, there's too many of them. And he's saying this in whatever it might be, like the, 5th century BCE, before when every book had to be handwritten. So there were a lot fewer books then. Now, all the more so. Just so we're both people who are in love with books, and from the start, there have been people who are like, ugh, really? Another book? And we've elevated that to put it into the Tanakh itself. So that's just one thing. I want to also start out by looking at just the key ideas of how we got here. The Mishnah in Avot. The Mishnah is the first great work of post-biblical Jewish thought, comes into its current form somewhere maybe around 220 of the Common Era. Avot might be a decade or two later. And it begins by saying, Moshe kibel Torah misinai. Moses received Torah. The translation is the Torah, but there is no ha. Like, kibel Torah misinai, received Torah at Sinai. Masra leYoshua, and transmitted it to Joshua, right, his successor. LeYoshua leZekenim, and Joshua to the elders. Zekenim leNevi'im, and the elders to the prophets. The Nevi'im Mesra la'anshe Knesset HaGolah, and the prophets to the men of the great assembly. V'hem amru shlosha davrim havu betunim badin amtu talmidim arbe v'asu siag leTorah. And they said three things: be patient in justice, raise many students, and make a fence around the Torah. This is the beginning of Torah. It says, Moses received Torah from, so with every text you ask yourself, what is this saying? Paraphrase it. Why is it saying it? And what does it mean? What did it mean to them back then? What does it mean to you today? Moses received Torah at Sinai. What does that mean? Two separate things. So he won't get into the promised land, but where's Sinai? Yeah, Sinai's before that. Sinai's the desert, the mountain that Moses goes up. So Moses receives Torah at Sinai, which means what? He received the foundation. He was given it. He's given it by God, who curiously here is not mentioned. This foundational sort of idea doesn't say from God, which is exactly what you would expect. He receives Torah at Sinai, but it doesn't say from God, even though I've read the book. It says, like, the book says from God. Right, but here it's not the focus of what's being talked about here. So we know it's from God, but like whatever like this is asking us to concentrate on, it's not God. Receives Torah at Sinai, umasarra leYoshua, and transmitted it to Joshua. Joshua is the successor, so he passed it along. But notice the two different words. It doesn't say Joshua received Torah from Moses, right? He transmitted it. So I guess there's also like, so there's a change in wording. Like, what's the difference between receiving something and transmitting it?
God handed it to him. received, so that Moses was able to hold it, like the Ten Commandments, and he transmitted it orally.
And transmits it orally. When he smashed it. So if you go by the Torah's telling in Exodus, Moses goes up Mount Sinai, and it says that God gives him the Ten Commandments, the Aseret HaDibrot, on stones, on stone tablets. Moses is up there for a while. It seems that the people hear at least the first two commandments, and then they tell God to stop, or they hear some of them and they tell God to stop saying it out loud. Just tell Moses, we don't want to hear the rest of it. And Moses is up there for 40 days. The people on the 40th day or something like this begin to worship the golden calf. It says the rabbis say they violated all 10 commandments in the worshiping of the calf, which is not in the movie because they would have to change the rating. It wouldn't have been G. And then Moses smashes the tablets, goes back up, gets a new set of tablets. The new ones have the exact same things on the old ones, not clear. But has both two sets of tablets. Here, by the way, it doesn't say receive the Aseret HaDibrot, the 10 Commandments. It says receive Torah at Sinai.
It also doesn't say the Torah, which is now a finite design something.
Right. When we say the Torah, we usually mean the Torah, the things that were the 5 books of Moses that we keep on the scroll in a special closet in this room, right? Like but Torah can mean all Jewish learning, all Jewish anything, right? Sort of like what, like so he receives Torah, maybe or maybe not the Torah, but the Torah, yeah. I mean, I took this from Sfaria. This is the, but I mean, you can even like look in the Hebrew. It's the third word there, right? Sort of like Moshe Kibel Torah, right? Ha Torah would be the Torah, but yes, the translation does say the Torah. I'm just, pardon me? It couldn't be the Torah because it hasn't been written yet. And if Moses received the whole Torah at Mount Sinai, presumably he would have like read it and been like, oh, I better not hit that rock. Note to self, right? Miriam, could you remind me when we get to the waters of Merivah, like don't, oh, she dies by then. So tell Joshua, like, don't yeah. So like, it couldn't be like, again, like there's a timeline problem with the Torah being received at Mount Sinai. It has to mean something else. It means, well, something else, something along the lines of learning. But whatever it was, Moses gets it at Sinai, passes it to Joshua, Joshua to the elders, the next generation of people, then the elders, the prophets, and the prophets of the men of the great assembly, whoever they are. They get mentioned like 3 or 4 times. They're somewhat mysterious. That is a door by door, right? Sort of like we have on our, from generation to generation, it's being passed along. What's the focus of this? They don't mention God. They do seem to mention generation to generation. Torah gets passed down. The implication of it is, and on, and on, and on, and on to you, right? Shmuley Yankovich, who's this brilliant rabbi who lives in Arizona, he's the like sort of bleeding left edge of orthodoxy. Says the first Mishnah does not state directly that God gave the Torah to the Jewish people. Instead, it begins with Moses receiving Torah from Sinai, rather than with the story of divine revelation. Were this Mishnah to mention God first, he says, then ethics, which are matters between human beings, would necessarily be considered second. Ethics becomes a foundation for a covenantal relationship with the divine, meaning that it doesn't mention God so that you don't like pin too much on God. The essence of this is that transition, right? From generation to generation. The sages impart this message from the start. The entire Torah enterprise requires relationship. To embrace tradition, one does not hide away in the library or in the sanctuary, but instead engages in face-to-face encounters. Like, so the idea is that, notice here, Torah isn't something that they're reading. Torah is something that is being passed teacher to student, to student, to student, to student. It's a face-to-face thing. It's an oral tradition, not something written down, not book, but face-to-face oral tradition. How accurately? So, right. So maybe shrimp was okay. Right. They had dolphin skin. So maybe that's the Jewish joke number, I think it's 58. That three times in the Torah it says, don't boil a kid in its mother's milk, right? Like God says to Moses, don't boil a kid in its baby goat, a baby goat, don't boil a baby goat in its mother's milk. And Moses says, we can't eat milk and meat together? God says, don't boil a baby goat in its mother's milk. Moses says, we have to have two different sets of plates? And God says, don't boil a baby goat in its mother's milk. Moses says, we have to wait 3 hours between eating one and the next? And God says, fine, have it your way. So
That's putting the fence around it.
that's the fence around the Torah, right? Notice this. So, right, be patient in the administration of justice, right? Meaning, so again, justice and patience, thinking through, maybe related to the Shema, to the listening that Norm read, is thing one. Thing two is have many students, which is more face-to-face transmission, not book transmission, and make a fence around the Torah, which is a buffer zone. This is rule one, right? Sort of like what people are focused on what you eat and don't eat. If you don't want to eat potato chips, rule number one is don't buy them. Don't have them in the house. If you have them in the house, yeah, put a fence around it, right? So this, right? Put a fence around the Torah. This is from the start. If you really care about something, you don't go right up to it. You have, if you really want to be on time, leave early, whatever it might be, right? So this is there from the start. For things you really care about, you will do that.
Received Torah and when it actually got written, like how many years?
Oh, so two things.
You have the oral.
So I want to do, two separate things. One, as always, like you have to maintain two different ways of thinking about Torah. And we can sort of like mention both. One is Moses received Torah at Mount Sinai. God spoke to Moses, Moses wrote it down. And whether Moses writes it down over the course while at Mount Sinai or like writes it slowly over the course of the desert, whether Joshua finishes off the last 8 verses or whatever, the point is it's a divine document given perfectly to Moses. If you want to talk about, oh, if I go to university, what are they going to teach me about about when the Torah comes into being? You're gonna see something that is hundreds of years after the time of Moses, coming into its current form around the year 500 BCE, somewhere around the time of the Babylonian exile. Moses might live, if you're going to peg Moses, you can put him about 1200 BCE, and you'd say that around the time of the exile, you'd find that. He has a timeline in here, doesn't he? Yeah, he's got a timeline. 1250 BCE leads the Israelites out of Egypt, and then you'd say the Torah comes into its current form, it seems, somewhere around the time of the Babylonian exile, right? So 586 BCE, and the return is 538, things like this. Like so that one more thing. Well, maybe I'll come to him at the end. I don't know further than that. The second thing is what about this game of telephone and things like this? The Jewish tradition that is there is that Moses receives Torah. That Torah is written down and is fixed and unchanging. Things that are written down never change. How well does society change? Yes. Did society change back then? Yes. No less than that. It's just because they don't have electronics, like things still change. Like so fixed and unchanging never works. You always need an amendment process. So by saying that God gave an oral Torah to Moses at Mount Sinai that's passed teacher to student, gives you have a fixed thing that never changes, the written Torah. And the way you explain something face to face, note that emphasis on face to face transmission is different for the different people you talk to. I can teach the same thing to the 7th graders, but I can explain it to them differently. I'm not going to teach something that's totally different because I want to teach the same thing, but I have to teach it on their level. If I do it to a class of the 10th graders, then I can teach it differently to them. If I teach to a class of adults, differently to them. If I teach to a class of non-Jews, it's differently to them. I'm going to say the same thing. I'm not going to change what I believe, and I'm not going to change the material, but it's going to be related differently to the different situation, right? So the oral Torah gives the ability to pivot to the situation that you're in a way that the person in front of you will understand it. And when the person says, but what about this different situation? You can say, oh, so we would take this principle that we have that received, and the way we would apply it in this new situation is that, right? It allows for something that's fixed so that you never end up doing Passover in February, because it's fixed to the springtime. It's written, nobody can argue with it because it's right there. It's a black letter on white parchment. You can't change it. But there are other things that sort of are just passed along orally that can adapt to the situation. That's sort of that's the secret sauce of all of this, is that there's a fixed and unchanging part, and the changeability of the game of telephone is by design. That you have unchanging and changing together. It's not all changing, and it's not all unchanging, it's both.
That does that reinforce the concept that true Judaism really isn't orthodoxy, that it should change over time?
If you're asking me, I would say yes, and I will quote my the Orthodox rabbi that I happen to have in my hand. But again, he's like the bleeding edge of orthodoxy, Yankowitz is. Says, today we see the danger to the Torah enterprise from two places. There are those who want to distort the tradition so radically that our ancestors would no longer recognize its essence at all. On the other hand, there are those who seek to freeze the tradition so that its relevance can be scarcely grasped by our contemporaries. The sages of Pirkei Avot caution against both destructive approaches and seek new measured understanding, right? So yes, you'd say that freezing it as if it's 1815 always, and you're dressing like the Polish gentry, and you're that is antithetical to the idea of this whole thing, and doing whatever you feel like is also antithetical to it, right? So he says both are not supposed to be, and that's sort of that there's supposed to be an organic development. So, so yes, I would say that sort of, that the goal is something different. Yankowitz says it beautifully. The sacred goal is not merely the survival of the tradition, as that would be quite a low bar. Instead, tradition flourishes because each successive generation has sufficient independence to pursue the transformational interpretation of the tradition within the context of their own time and place. So it's supposed to be recognizable as Judaism, that somebody could walk in, that your grandfather from Patterson might not recognize Patterson, but should be able to walk into shul and say, oh, I recognize this, or I see where it came from. It's different, but I get it. But they shouldn't walk in and be like, oh, this is exactly the same, because it turns out that the needs of the Jews of this time aren't the same as the Jews of that time. On Shabbat, yeah.
Shabbat.
Let me get there in a moment. I would say that the signature story of this is a famous one that you might have heard of Moses on top of Mount Sinai, receiving Torah from God. And God says, write it down this and write that. And when you're writing it, put these little crowns on the letters. When you read Torah, you know, the little crowns on the letters. Like some letters have little lines sticking up from them each time. Moses says, why am I putting crowns on the letters? God says, ugh, a couple of 100 years from now, there's going to be a guy, Rabbi Akiva, who's going to learn heaps and heaps of halachot from the crowns on the letters, not just from the words, but from how they're written. Akiva's going to know how to interpret this. And Moses says, well, this I got to see. God says, well, go ahead. Moses turns around and he finds himself in Rabbi Akiva's classroom. Moses is, 1250 BCE. Akiva's is 120-ish CE, right? So he's fast forward 1600 years. Moses, it says, is in Rabbi Akiva's classroom in the last row. This, the way classrooms worked in the Roman world, the smartest students were in the front row, the worst students were in the back of the classroom, as sometimes is the case. Moses, we're told, still is the case. Moses, right, Peter, Moses is in the last row. And Akiva's teaching this and that, and Moses doesn't understand a word of it. And he starts to panic. Moses starts to sweat. He's like, oh my gosh, I took all this time going to the top of the mountain to get the Torah. I don't understand any of this stuff that this guy is teaching. And he says he's teaching Torah. And one of the other students raise their hand and says, Rabbi, how do we know this? And Rabbi says, this is Torah Moshe Sinai. This was Torah that was given to Moses at Mount Sinai. And it says that Moses relaxed. The idea being that Moses didn't recognize what was being taught in Akiva's classroom because it had changed over time. But the fact that they were still tracing their tradition to Moses himself is sort of like what was comforting to Moshe. Moses turns back around and goes to and continues his conversation with God, which goes in an odd direction from there, but we don't have to do the whole thing. So there is a sense of things progress, and it's not supposed to look exactly the same, but it's supposed to all trace to the same root. We'll get to Shabbat in a second. I want to do the next. The underlying this, the spoken word and the written word is the next text. This is page 2. This is the famous story from the Talmud that you might know, but this is the original of it, right? So this is telling a story. The Talmud comes into its current form, maybe the 5th century CE. Is telling a story of Hillel and Shammai, who live in the 1st century BCE, right? They live before the time of, about 100 years before the time of Jesus-ish, in Jerusalem. Tanu Rabbanan, the sages say, Ma'aseh, there was a story. B'goy echad, there was a non-Jew, Sheba lifnei Shammai, who came before Shammai. He was the leader of one of the great schools of thought in Judaism at the time, Amar Lo, and he says to him, Kama Torot yesh lechem. He says, how many Torahs do you have? This guy says to Shammai, and Shammai Amar Lo, and Shammai says to him, Shtaim, I've got 2. Torah shebiktav and Torah shebal peh. The written Torah and the oral Torah. Amar Lo, and the guy says to him, Shebiktav ani ma'amincha. About the written Torah, I believe you. Shebal peh, ani ma'amincha. This oral Torah, I don't believe you about. Yani almanat talmideni Torah shebichtav. Convert me on the condition that you only teach me the written Torah. Shammai yells at him and throws him out, with a scolding. So this guy asks, how many Torahs you have? Shammai says, got 2. Written, oral. Guy says, I only like the written one. I think this oral one, you're making it up. It's just a game of telephone. It's failed. Shammai is like, get out of my face. I don't have time for you. Same guy, Balif Nehilo. Here, the translation here, the light face is the 21st century editor. The bold face is the translation of the Hebrew. So the light face is just to try and make it more understandable. The bold face is what's actually written there. Balif Nehilo. Guy comes before Hillel. So, Hillel converts him on the spot, same day. Guy says to him, I only want the written Torah. Hillel's like, go to the mikvah. Whether or not we approve. The Yom HaKama. Next day, Amarle, Hillel teaches him And he teaches them the basics. Where do you start? Teaches them the Aleph, Bet, Gimel. Says there's an Aleph, there's a Bet, there's a Gimel, there's a Dalet. The Machar, a Fichle. The next day he reverses it. The next day he points at a Tav and says this is an Aleph. Points at a Shin, says this is a Bet. Points at a Resh, says this is a Gimel. Points at a Kuf, says this is a Dalet. Guy says to him, he says, that's not what you said yesterday. Yesterday he said that was an Aleph and that was a Bet. Today you're saying this is an Aleph and this is a Bet. What's going on? Marle, Hillel says to him, So Hillel says to him, so yesterday you relied on what I said. So you should also rely on me for the other oral traditions. What's his point? To understand anything, you need a teacher. You're believing somebody's story at some point in time. At some point in time, somebody sat you down and said, this is an A, this is a B, and this is a C. And everything you know comes to you through an oral tradition. Acting like the written tradition is more authoritative is an illusion, because you only know what the written tradition means because somebody taught you an oral tradition. You're relying on some teacher somewhere to teach you what this stuff means. So, and then you can draw your own conclusion from that. But like ultimately, you're relying on somebody's authority. So you can't say that written Torah is authoritative without taking the oral Torah. This seems to be his idea. And by the way, notice the difference in approach. Shammai is principled. Hillel is principled. They both believe in the written and the oral Torah. Shammai, when somebody asks him an annoying question, throws the guy out with an insult. Get out of my face. Don't bother me with your stupid questions. Hillel doesn't even let out. He's like, okay, let's do this. And brings him close and then teaches him. It's this amazing move of, if the point is to bring more people closer to God and have more mitzvot done in the world, Shammai, through his impatience, is pushing people away, and Hillel, by being chill about it, is bringing people near.
That the oral constantly changes by contradicting himself from one day to the next?
Yeah, no, he's trying to teach him, not that it changes by contradicting from one day to the next. He's saying that people, this is common, by the way, in what I hear people say too, sort of like the Torah is the Torah. Moses received the Torah, the written Torah. This oral Torah stuff, a bunch of rabbis made that crap up. He's saying all of it is coming from the same source. You only know that stuff because some rabbi taught it to you. That everything comes from an oral tradition. Everything that we know isn't, as it were, from a book. It's from a teacher teaching us how to read that book. And so everything comes from an oral tradition, is his larger point. If you rely on me for the Aleph Bet, you have to rely on me for this other stuff too. And if you don't believe me about this other stuff, then I'm going to show you that even the stuff that you think you do know can be unreliable. Yeah.
Some teachers who will teach and they'll be nasty about it.
Right.
And then you have others that are patient and, use their word as opposed to saying, read it, write it. They'll actually show and tell.
Right. So this is classic pedagogy, effective pedagogy, and impatient pedagogy, modeled from a story that's 2,100 years old. And it still plays out. Yes. So it is it's a great one. The follow-up is similar. I include, because this is just where it appears, one that many people know. Shuv Maaseh. There's another story. B'goy echad, a certain non-Jew, Shabbat lifnei Shammai, came before Shammai, apparently didn't know his reputation. Amar lo, Yereni almanad shetalmideni kol haTorah kula kshatni omed al regel echad. He says to him, I'll convert to Judaism I'll convert with you on the condition that you teach me the entire Torah while I stand on one foot. Shammai hits him with the builder's cubit, which is like the yardstick that was in his hand, right? So like the measuring thing, like it was maybe had like a walking stick that was with him. His job was a builder because all the rabbis had day jobs. They didn't sit around and study all day. Whacks the guy in the head for asking such a stupid question. That was the old days. Balifnei Hillel, before things got so litigious. Balifnei Hillel, guy comes for Hillel. Gera, Hillel converts him on the spot. Amar lo, and he says to him, Al sani lechavrecha lo tavid. What is hateful to you, do not do to another. Zohi kol Torah kula. That is the entire Torah. All the rest is commentary. Now go study. And again, where do you find that in the Torah? Nowhere, not in the Torah. Not in the Torah. You can read the Torah backwards and forwards, nowhere, the rest of the Torah. It doesn't say what is hateful to you, do not do to someone else. It's just not there. It's in the New Testament, which postdates Hillel. Hillel's before the time of Jesus, but in the positive, Hillel states it in the negative. But the point being that he feels confident enough to boil down all of this into a phrase. He says the essence of it is that we're all working for this. We're working towards this principle, and everything feeds that. Whether it's honor your parents, whether it's shatnez, understand it or not, whether it's don't eat shrimp, understand it or not, it's all Shabbat and all its details, is all feeding this. Go and learn it. And again, he's pulling people closer by being chill. Also in find a teacher is in Pirkei Avot. Rest of the end through this. The next page, if you look in the 10 Commandments, Aseret Dibrot says, remember Shabbat day to keep it holy. 6 days you should work and do all your work. By the way, also a commandment is work 6 days. It's not just rest on the 7th, but work 6 days. But the 7th day is a Shabbat to your God. You shall not do any, to Adonai your God. You shall not do any work. Your son, your daughter, your male or female slave, your cattle, stranger who is within your settlements. For 6 days Adonai made the heaven and the earth, and the sea, and all that is in them. Then rest on the 7th day. Therefore, God blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it. Right? So it says you can do no work on Shabbat, which brings up the question that Heidi asked, or implicitly asked.
What is work?
What's work? And it doesn't say. It just says don't work. And yet throwing a fence around it, every Shabbat, you know what I do?
Work.
Go to work. By walk. You walk, what you do is not work, right? You don't work a day in your life. I'm still cashing the checks. It doesn't say. This is just part of the textual tradition. So the oral Torah eventually gets written down. Why? Because it seems that in Roman times, they were afraid that as Romans were made teaching Torah illegal, and the Romans were hunting down people who taught Torah, that if this happens enough, then all the people who know it will be off the scene, and the whole system of face-to-face transmission will fail. So what do? We have to write it down. Because if you write something down, it's got a better chance of surviving, a message in a bottle, as it were. And that's the Mishnah. And the Mishnah has all the rules. I included it here. I'm not going to read it, but people wonder, where does this stuff come from? It says the primary avot malchot arba'im chaser echad. The primary categories of labor on Shabbat are 40 minus 1.
I'm just curious, was there a technical evolution that led to that? I mean, was it not practical to write things down when they first started telling the stories?
So
and
I
then
think
paper became more available at a certain time, or had nothing to do with
yeah, yes and no. I think part of it. Well, so there are two ways of doing it. There's the tradition is God tells Moses, write this part down, but do this one orally for this teacher to student reason, so that it can adapt to the times. But the people who are adapting it isn't just somebody sitting around, but the person adapting it is the person who feels the connection to Moses and God on Mount Sinai. I feel like I'm the custodian of this. I'm the guardian. And so if I'm going to change something and do it sort of deliberately, right? Be deliberate in justice, I can do it deliberately and carefully because I'm the conservator of this. That's conservative Judaism as well. Like sort of like this, I'm the conservator of this. And so so if something needs to change, it's going to be only for a good reason and only like if that, so that's part of the idea of it. Like, I think that it's this. You'd say if you want to be, if a less God-based way would be that the oral law pops up alongside in order to adapt it to the times, in order to make sure that it can live and breathe. The rabbinic Shabbat, for instance, is looser than the Karaite Shabbat. Those who who didn't hold by an oral Torah would sit in the dark and not cook because the Torah seems to imply that. The rabbi's Shabbat is a little more chilled out from that. So so I want to just point out there's a list of things that are forbidden in the Mishnah. The Talmud then will sort of get derivative categories of this. This is essentially the same as that, right? Because these things are all mainly agricultural. Cooking is cooking seems to be mentioned in the Torah, but one who needs one who bakes, right? So bishul is one of the av melachot, right? So driving is has traditionally been derivative of two things. One, the Torah forbids starting a fire. Late in the book of Exodus, it forbids starting a fire, and every time you turn on internal combustion engine, you're sparking a fire, which is not the case. I just bought an Evie that we named Evie after this week's bat mitzvah. Which isn't the case, but the rabbis to have a derivative category that that will be outside of that. The last one really carrying from domain to domains would be that, but this that's and the last thing is just sort of like the Talmud would say, oh, these are all things that are related to the tabernacle. The way that the textual tradition works is the Torah starts the discussion, the Mishnah continues it, the Talmud will argue about it, and over the years following that, rabbis are supposed to debate it based on the situation. So that's essentially how things like driving gets debated around, and in yeah. So the way the question was about having others do work for you on Shabbat. So by the way, that's a great example of the push and pull, because the bottom line is Jews eventually found themselves in places like, say, Poland, where it's one thing not to light a fire for 25 hours when I'm living in Haifa. It's another thing when I'm living in Gdansk. right? The so this is a push and pull of written and oral Torah, and where oral Torah loosens things up. So you're not supposed to say somebody has to do something, but you suggest it. And if you want to give somebody a gift after the fact, that's nice too. So you're never supposed to say, could you light a fire for me? You'd say, boy, it's cold. I had a friend who one last thing is an unbroken chain of textual tradition, which is here, which occurs in the Book of Kings. The Book of Kings happens, this is late in the First Temple period. It's among the last things in the narrative parts of the Tanakh. It says, the high priest Hilkiah said to the scribe Shaphan, I have found a scroll of the teaching in the house of God. And Hilkiah gave the scroll to Shaphan, who read it. The scribe Shaphan also told the king, the high priest Hilkiah has given me a scroll, and Shaphan read it to the king. When the king heard the words of the scroll of the teaching here is the Hebrew word for teaching is Torah, right? When the scroll of the Torah, he rent his clothes. Torah is clothes in a sign of mourning. And the king gave orders to the priest Hilkiah and to so-and-so and so-and-so. And 13 says, go inquire of God on my behalf, on behalf of the people, and on behalf of all Judah, concerning the words of the scroll that has been found. For indeed, great indeed must be God's wrath has been kindled against us, because our ancestors did not obey the words of this scroll to do all that has been prescribed for us. They have the Torah in front of them, and the king's reaction is, no one told me about this, and no one's been doing this, so God's got to be really angry. The point being, when you talk about is orthodoxy, sort of like the authentic way or not, one of the standard Orthodox talking points is that we have an unbroken chain from Moses to us. Here, the Tanakh itself, the Bible itself says, you know what we don't have? An unbroken chain. We have an instance where the king of Israel is like, oh my gosh, no one's ever heard of this. Nobody's doing any of this. In the next chapter, so there's a whole thing of all the stuff that they changed. And then it says, the king commanded the people, offer the Passover sacrifice to Adonai your God as prescribed in the scroll of the covenant. Now the Passover sacrifice had not been offered in that manner in the days of the chieftains, the judges who ruled over Israel, or during the days of the kings of Israel, the kings of Judah. Only the 18th year of King Josiah was such a Passover sacrifice offered in that manner to God in Jerusalem. King Josiah, about 500-ish BCE. The judges, which are the guys right after Joshua, 1100 BCE. 600 years, they didn't do Pesach? They didn't do Pesach for 600 years? Most of the 600 years right after the time of Moses? So here, is it an unbroken textual chain? Not really. This is sort of like the purpose of this is closer, I think, to what Yankowitz is saying, that it's all like it's supposed to be a technology for building a certain connected face-to-face ethical world, and it's not about following orders. If it were just about following orders, these guys wouldn't have fallen down on the job and say, not done Pesach for 600 years, which is hard to imagine. This isn't Shatnez. It'd be one thing if they're like, oh, we haven't done Shatnez for 600 years. Wow, shocked. Pesach, a little more central to the operation. So it seems that this is something later, but meaning that there's always been this push and pull. So part of the point of the book is that like sort of like Judaism develops over time, and it does organically grow. And we can argue about what things should change and what things shouldn't change when it's written sort of like black letters on white letters, shrimp, lobster. It's a little harder to change because it's there. When it's part of the oral tradition, you might argue driving. Or two sets of plates, or how long you wait between one, like, that might be a little more fungible, but you see sort of how those things work and how like the text influences them and how oral tradition influences them.
In different parts of the world, Judaism was practiced differently.
Right.
You know, I mean, I started to say before, when we were in Israel, one of the trips we went on, two of them actually, we met with somebody from Ethiopia.
It was a different, right, a different practice.
Because
Because they're remote from the development of the oral law over time. Yep.
They were looking for the sanctuary.
Yeah, they were looking for the temple when they got there.
Looking for the temple and the right.
They told us when they got
Right.
there. But it was still there. Because they were so isolated for all that time.
We got Ben Gavir working on it. All right, we will pause there and continue next week with this, and then I think the following week is Thanksgiving. So yeah, with the I'm sorry, right.